Everybody likes joy and happiness. These are called piti and sukha in Pali. No one doesn't like these two qualities. So if one likes these things, joy and happiness, then what should one do to get it? One should try to search for a method by which one can gain these, a correct method. And finding such a method, one should follow that path and see where it goes. One should walk the path with respect, continuously and steadfastly, according to the instructions, without taking breaks. So, and if one does so, results will definitely come about, good results. First of all, due to physical seclusion, kaya viveka, one has more time, and one's behavior, one's life becomes clean. So this is what we gain. And we're also free of the companionship of kilesas. Without sati, the mind has free rein, and it will go to what it likes. And when it finds that object, then there will be greed. If the mind happens to meet with something it dislikes, then anger will follow. And not observing what is really there as it is, there will be aññānupekkha. There will be the delusion that's involved in not knowing. All beings who are without sati are like this. And thus they get no mental peace. If on top of not having mental control, one commits misdeeds, then it's even worse. So if one wants guaranteed happiness and true peace, then one must stop harming others. One has to take up the path of sila, morality, and avoid the transgressive kilesas, the misdeeds. And by this means, by avoiding these actions, one dispels them. Observing morality, that is, avoiding misdeeds, is like avoiding an area, a town or whatever, where contagious disease is prevalent, like the plague. So we would avoid going to a place where that type of illness is prevalent. As much as one avoids doing misdeeds, one dispels them. And so this is a type of protection by refraining. And you could call it prevention. But the mind, in order to protect the mind, we need virya, effort, sati, mindfulness, and samadhi, concentration. Or further, with the jhanic factors, we can overcome the nivaranas, the obstacles to concentration, and the obstacles to all types of kusala. With the factor of vitakka, accurate aiming, tina mita, sloth and torpor is dispelled, and thus the mind is free. With the factor of vichara, which directly rubs on the object, directly contacts the object, we are free of skeptical doubt, vicikiccha, wavering. And with the factor of piti, joy, the nivarana of vyavara, or anger, is overcome. When piti arises, the mind is happy and joyous, fresh. And thus it overcomes the brittle and rotten type of rejecting anger and hatred. And when there's happiness, happiness also is peaceful and cool. And so this quality of happiness overcomes the scattered mind, odicca, and also regret and remorse, which are hot states. And with every noting that we make, every second that we're noting the object, then we're free of kamacchanda, sense desire, because the mind is unable to go to thoughts of thoughts of good things to see, hear, taste, touch, and smell. The mind is falling on the object every second. So thus we're keeping the mind clear and clean. So if the jhanic factors arise, these 5 factors, then the obstacles which block all wholesome acts, the nivaranas, are overcome. So the mind becomes clear and clean. This is through refraining from misdeeds and preventing unwholesomeness. And thus the mind is protected. So one gains protection and defense for the mind, and thus security arises and peace. This is what the Buddha taught, and yogis now are working to gain this peace that comes as described. If one thinks about the work that we are doing with this practice and the results that it brings, one will be very satisfied. So this is called Buddhist culture. And practicing like this leads to real peace. So one should go about one's practice happily, to make the mind meet the object head on, starting with the main object of the rising and the falling. The yogis need accurate aim every second of the time. With the accurate aim occurring every second of the time, when the mind won't go to wrong thoughts of sense pleasures, thoughts of anger, wanting to harm others, and so on. Kama vitaka, vyabhara vitaka, and vihimsa vitaka. And in particularly, this quality of accurate aim, vitaka, makes the mind fresh. Vitaka itself is fresh and active in a subtle way. So it makes the mind, when it arises, it makes the mind and the other mind states fresh also. And vichara is when one directly contacts the qualities that occur in the rising, such as stiffness, tension, or movement. And because of that, contacting the qualities directly, one is definite. One's mind becomes definite about what the object is. And thus the nivaranas are dispelled to that extent. And because of this, joy, piti, results. And from that also happiness results, or we could say peace. So these qualities emerge, joy and peace. If one understands the benefit that one can gain from physical solitude, from staying alone, And then one also staying in solitude, one aims, the mind directly connects with the object, then one is also free of the companionship of kilesas. So because one doesn't have any companions, one has a lot of time to practice. And because one doesn't have the companionship of the kilesas, the mind is clean, protected and secure. And peace of a sort arises. When knowledge develops, one gains true peace. Before knowledge develops, with just samadhi, although it becomes quiet, but it's not true peace yet. When one moment after another is collected like this, then bhavana occurs. One individual moment of these factors is not very much. It doesn't have much strength individually. But when each moment is connected to the next in a series without a gap, then their power becomes amazingly strong. Bhavana is not something that occurs in just one moment. It happens when many moments are collected together. And thus it's said in Pali, viveka ja piti sukha, the joy and happiness that arise due to the jhanic factors of vitaka and vichara are caused by staying without physical companions, kaya viveka, and together with staying without the companionship of kilesas, which means that there are no nivaranas, no obstacles to kusala. If one notes every second the jhanic factors are present, then one should just calculate how valuable that is. So one who understands how valuable a single moment in which one notes and the jhanic factors are present, such a one will continue so as to increase the value that one has even more, to make it grow. And such a person will gain a further level of happiness and joy that is amazingly. In the Satipatthana Sutta, the Buddha describes how piti arises towards the end of the sutta. And 5 kinds of joy, there are 5 kinds of joy, piti, and there are also 5 kinds of happiness, sukha. The first type of piti is called kodika piti. That means small size, small piti, or minor. And the second type is called kanika piti, momentary joy. It's also small, but it occurs often. And then the third type is called okantika piti. This is a sudden experience of joy, like a jolt or a lightning bolt that one can feel in one's body. And the fourth type is called obega piti. And when this occurs, the yogi might feel as though they're floating up into the air, or floating in the wind, or drifting. And then the fifth type is called parana piti, which pervades the entire body. One doesn't, when this last stage of joy arises, this pervasive joy, one doesn't want to open one's eyes if one's eyes are closed. One doesn't want to make any sort of movement at all. one doesn't want to disrupt this incredibly good feeling. One doesn't want to get up from the sitting. Among these 5 types of joy, piti, the first, second, and third, kodika, kanika, and okantika, are called dubala piti, or weak joy. And the fourth and the fifth kinds are called balawa piti, or strong joy. Now happiness, Sayadaw mentioned 2 basic types. One is vedita sukha. This is the happiness that comes when we experience a good object. And then there's also avedita sukha. This is happiness that doesn't involve experiencing a sense object. It doesn't come from experiencing a sense object. So yogis should think about this, what these qualities are like, and in terms of what one can experience for oneself, one should. So the Buddha, this Sayadaw wants to talk about in theory and practice how these qualities that the Buddha talked about can be experienced, and one should think for oneself about how much there is that one can gain. The yogis begin by starting with the rising and the falling, note every object that arises. With effort to note every object as soon as it arises, and with accurate aim. And in doing so, when the mind can stay on the object, time and again, say for 2 minutes, or 3 minutes, or 5 minutes, continuously applying effort and accurate aim so that the mind is staying with the object, then the joy and happiness arise, or joy and peace. This is viveka piti sukha. So at this point, with the first experience of joy, one feels things like goose flesh. And one just feels a little bit of happiness or joy or peace. And when the noting becomes stronger, then this joy and peace comes in flashes and comes more and more often. And this is called kanika piti, or momentary joy. And when the mind can connect with the object most of the time, when this directly hitting the object most of the time is happening, most of the time, then this third level of joy arises, okantika piti. And what it's like is when one goes to the ocean and one sees the big waves rolling in. Then that's how the joy feels in our body, just like big waves. A wave comes and then it subsides, and it comes again and subsides. We feel it in our chest. It can be. So and this happens again and again. It happens often. So this happens when the noting is somewhat good. And when these types of piti arise, then it becomes evident to the yogi that the Dhamma is starting to develop. And although this joy is not really that great yet, it's something that pulls the yogis to continue their practice. These first 3 qualities, which are called dubala piti, or weak joy, the Buddha used the word pamoja to describe these. And in English you might say delight one feels delight. And this pamoja, or delight, is delight in the Dhamma, not delight in sense pleasures. And why does it happen? How does it happen? And free of what is it that it happens? So the Buddha said, Dasyame nivarane pahine. That means that when one notes every arising object, applying effort and accurate aim, when the virya, sati, and samadhi have full strength, then these 10 nivaranas, which block kusala and make the mind foul, one sees that the mind is free of those. And this thought tends to come up now and then in the yogi's mind when they reach this stage. So this seeing that these factors are not present anymore, these nivaranas, delights the yogi. And what it's like is when you go along a journey, say you're walking along a road to go somewhere, and you come to a place where you can rest. You come to a rest house. Then the traveler feels happy and peaceful. And this pamoja, or delight in the Dhamma, is like a rest stop that we encounter in our practice when we see that our mind is free of disturbances. We become delighted, and so we feel things like goose flesh, or we feel jolts, like electrical jolts in our body, or we feel waves of joy. And it happens because we are free of these negative dhammas, the nivaranas. And how we become free of them is that we observe every arising object with accurate aim and effort, as the Buddha instructed. If we can, if a yogi is able to note the object like this, noting the object accurately, time and again, then that yogi will be able to see these qualities in oneself. One comes to be able to see them for oneself. One experiences pamoja, or delight, to the extent that one has accurate noting. And when one meets this, when one encounters this at the start of one's practice, then one becomes encouraged to continue. And when the Vipassana yogi's momentary concentration, anika samadhi, is not yet very, very strong, and when one's noting of the object, of every newly arising object, when one does so, when one's sati is not yet very steadfast, and when the samadhi is not yet that good, when one continues to practice, so that is, when one continues having reached this level of joy, the samadhi is not yet that good, and the sati is not yet that good. They're somewhat good. But from that point, if one continues to apply ardent effort and accurate aim, when the samadhi becomes good, whereas initially we had to apply a lot of aiming, we had to deliberately aim when the object arises. When the samadhi becomes stronger, then as soon as the object arises, one can note it accurately without having to make a special effort to aim. One is skilled at this point. And one doesn't need to, the mind, when the object arises, the mind is able to note it, and the mind sinks into the object. So at this point, that one is able to note the object, hitting it accurately without making any special effort to aim. And at this point, the samadhi, the momentum and the force of the samadhi is good. And the joy and happiness that arise at this point are called samadhija piti sukha. They are the joy and peace that come due to concentration. Previously, what we experienced, the weak level of joy, vivekaja piti sukha, is due to being free of companions and due to being free of the companionship of kilesas, due to solitude. This level of joy is weak. But when one has consistent effort and accurate noting, then strong joy, balawa piti, arises. When one is able to note the object for the most part without missing, this strong joy arises, and this is called samadhija piti sukha. This is stronger and deeper than the first level of joy. When one gains skill in noting, it's like when an archer has gained a lot of skill in shooting an arrow, and when the archer is shooting at the target, they don't need to make a lot of effort in order to hit the bullseye because they're so skilled. And it's like that, if one is going to train to become an archer, then at first one needs to practice shooting the arrow again and again and again. And when one can hit the bullseye, one feels really happy. And Sayadaw watched archers shooting, and he saw that that's what happens. When they can hit the bullseye easily, they get really elated. And he sees that happens with yogis too. When they hit the bullseye, which is the arising object, with virya sati samadhi, accurate aiming, with vichara, the jhanic factors. At first, one has to make a lot of effort and really deliberately aim. But as one continues, one comes to be able to note the object effectively, naturally. The mind connects with the object directly without one having to make any special effort. At the start, the yogis have to make the effort to observe this bullseye, which is the arising object, whatever arises in our mind and body, the rising, the falling, and all other arising objects. And when one practices enough, when one does this enough, making effort and making one's aim accurate, one gains skill. And like the archer, one can hit that arising object accurately without the qualities of vitaka, accurate aim, and vichara, rubbing, without applying them deliberately. So then the mind falls on the object again and again, and it's steady, stable, and the mind becomes clear because of the stability. So the mind is able to observe the arising object accurately time and again, and the nivaranas are not present. So at this point, the fourth type of joy, ubeka piti, arises. And when knowledge occurs, of course, needless to say, one feels happy. And then further, when parana piti, a pervasive joy, arises, one doesn't want to get up. One doesn't want to move at all. One doesn't want to do anything to disrupt because the feeling is so good. This is a very good type of joy that one experiences when a pervasive joy arises. So then one really has this delight in the Dhamma. And starting at this point, the yogi becomes very interested in the practice and is able to gain the special Dhamma within a short time. It depends on one's practice. It depends on one's training of oneself. When one's basics are good, then these qualities come about. So it's said in the Pali, Paṇḍitā Sayadaw. Strong joy arises in one who experiences weak joy. So once one has experienced weak joy, the strong joy can also arise. And this strong joy will pull the yogi along. So before this balawa piti, strong joy, arises, at that point the yogi is not yet that interested, and there's still a lot of misses when one is noting. But once that strong joy arises, the yogi is very enthused to continue the practice, and it's as though this joy just pulls one along. So Sayadaw will continue this topic tomorrow night. That's all for today. Sadhu.